You're watching The Context USA. Now, the US designation of the Venezuelan Cartel de las Soles as a foreign terrorist organisation comes into force today as Washington ramps up its pressure on President Nicolás Maduro. The Trump administration accuses the group of bringing drugs into the US and says it's led by President Maduro. Caracas has called the plan ridiculous, saying the cartel doesn't even exist. The designation, though, grants the US more legal power in its fight against drugs. Well, let's speak with Brian Fonseca now. He's director of the Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University, also a retired Marine and a former senior research manager at US Southern Command. Brian, thanks for joining us here on BBC News. We're told that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, is travelling to Trinidad and Tobago. When you link that with the gathering of troops in the region, the USS Ford there as well, what do you think all of that means? How should that be interpreted?
I mean, for now, this is just a consistent and slow escalation of flexing the U.S. military in the Caribbean in the hopes that it can get to some type of regime change in Venezuela, preferably without having to put boots on the ground, and instead increasingly putting pressure through visible military presence in the region and a sort of choir around that, suggesting that the U.S. has the military on standby to do so, is designed to hopefully, for the U.S., fracture the political and military elite in Venezuela and see some type of transition for Maduro out of power.
I mean, you're talking about regime change there, but what we hear from the administration is clamping down on a war on drugs and so on. Do you think that is just a front for what you're describing?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's both. I think certainly the United States is looking at the Caribbean as a means of sort of low barrier to execute military operations against criminal enterprises. That's something that the White House has been very considerate and persistent about in terms of explaining that it is a priority in American foreign policy, but at the same time leveraging its presence in the Caribbean to continue to put pressure on Venezuela. And then tying Venezuela to narco-terrorism as a means of sort of capturing both of those priorities for the White House.
What's the risk to the US here, though, of this gathering of troops in the area and general nervousness among some of the nations there?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, the threat of escalation. The United States continues to apply pressure. The big question is how far is the United States willing to go? If regime change is certainly part of the equation and the United States feels it can't come home unless it gets that, then how far is it willing to go in terms of the ability to use military pressure in the Caribbean? The other question is sort of, how does the U.S. come back and save face if it's unable to get to regime change? What other provisions might it be able to extract against its foreign policy interests in the region and still come home and save face? I think that's an important question that the White House is grappling with now. But what we're seeing in terms of buildup is both this attention towards criminal enterprises, but also the slow escalation of military pressure designed to create fractures within the government in Venezuela in the hopes that it gets both the ability to claim victories against criminal enterprises operating in the region and regime change in Venezuela.
Okay. Brian Fonseca, Director of the Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University. Thanks so much for joining us here on BBC News.
Thank you.
Let's bring back in our panel here, Joe and Amanda. I mean, there's